us. Glad you're here. Figure it's good to have an evening conversation on Sunday as we prepare to face the first full week of 2021. I hope you all had a good holiday, a good new year, and I hope that we all have a pretty good discussion here tonight. I've got my opening remarks like I always do. Then from there, we will jump onto the roll call where I call you out, names and locations, and we find out who is with us. I do the roll call, and then after that, I answer your super chat questions. Just 1 second, making it so I see all the chat. So yeah, that'll be the way we do it tonight. I was on George Galloway's Mother of All talk shows earlier today to have a conversation about the situation in the United States. For those of you who might have missed it, the clip will be posted later tonight. I've been on some podcasts. I'm making my rounds as usual. Might be some new debates in the works pretty soon, so keep in light of all of that. But yeah, the way we'll do it, opening remarks, roll call, and then I answer your super chat questions. I will write down your super chats as they come in. So keep them rolling in. And I have plenty of unnamed orange beverage. We are drinking unnamed orange beverage tonight. And that'll be fun. So yeah, folks, let's make this a lovely conversation. Keep the super chats rolling in. Tweet this out, post this on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Bunker Chan, Instagram, whatever app you feel like posting this on, go ahead and post it on there because we're going to have a great conversation tonight. So other than that, I'm going to jump right into my opening remarks. Two very, very important things that are very, very timely that must be discussed. Thing number one, tomorrow, Julian Assange. Yes, the extradition decision regarding Julian Assange is set to come down tomorrow. And all eyes are on the United Kingdom. As Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, who revealed so much information about the lies of empire and the crimes of imperialism, whether it was murdering people in Iraq, so much is at stake. They are trying to extradite Julian Assange to the United States so they can silence him and imprison him. And all eyes are on the United Kingdom to really see if they will do the right thing and not extradite Julian Assange. Now, I see thoughts about liberals being tone deaf to the economic damage of COVID policies. All right. Liberals, tone deaf, COVID. Folks, it is no secret that the U.S. government talked openly about killing Julian Assange, killing him. Syria conflict. Mikhail Suslov openly talked about killing Julian Assange, killing him. That was openly discussed by U.S. officials when he was hauled up in the Ecuadorian embassy. So how in the world would it be safe to extradite Julian Assange to the United States? There's no possible way that you could argue that it was safe. Furthermore, he's being held in torture conditions. He's not being given his winter clothing. He's freezing. He's cold. It's so wrong what is being done to Julian Assange. Julian Assange did not leak any classified information. Other people did. Edward Snowden did. Chelsea Manning did. They leaked classified information to Julian Assange. All Julian Assange did was publish it. Julian Assange was simply the publisher. And if you lock up the publisher for publishing classified information that was given by someone else, this sets a very, very dangerous precedent in the United States, where essentially the press will be afraid to publish anything without getting explicit permission from government officials, right? It was, of course, illegal for government officials to leak classified information. Governments have their secrets. But if a government official does break the law and leak classified information, and the newspaper prints it, that newspaper cannot be held accountable. There's a long-standing history of that. You talk about the publishing of the Pentagon Papers by the New York Times. This is all extremely dangerous, very, very extremely dangerous. So we should all be watching what happens with Julian Assange, and if he is extradited to the United States, God forbid, if that happens, we obviously then have to raise the alarm and beat the drums of dropping the charges as he's tried in the United States, because when you set a precedent where publishers face legal consequences for publishing content that was given to them by someone else, that basically leads to a situation where the press cannot report on the activities of governments. That's basically what happens, and that is very, very dangerous. So that said, there's another important thing, which is today is the anniversary, the 1-year anniversary of the day Qasem Soleimani was murdered in a cowardly act by the Trump administration. Qasem Soleimani is an individual. He was the leader of the Quds Force and of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran. He's someone who's viewed as a hero in Iran, but also as a hero in Iraq, a hero in Syria, a hero in Afghanistan, a hero in many parts of the world. Qasem Soleimani has kicked ISIS ass. No one has killed more ISIS terrorists than Qasem Soleimani. Qasem Soleimani has fought against ISIL heroically and protected Christians from ISIL. Many Christians' lives were saved by Qasem Soleimani, and he was a heroic and well-loved figure within the Islamic Republic of Iran. And the way U.S. media covered the killing of Qasem Soleimani was completely outrageous. They tried to make it sound like Qasem Soleimani was Osama bin Laden, when in reality, Qasem Soleimani was the greatest enemy of ISIS and al-Qaeda types. In Syria, Qasem Soleimani stood with the Syrian Arab Republic, the government that protected religious minorities like Christians and Alawites and Shia. And in Iraq, he protected religious minorities, and he was always fighting against the Osama bin Laden types. Comrades, we should be using the failure of force the vote. All right. Hashtag. All kinds of deception is put out there. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a country that had a revolution in 1979. They toppled the Shah, who was a brutal U.S.-backed dictator, under the slogan of not capitalism but Islam, war of poverty against wealth. They did very, very dramatic things to improve people's lives. They've raised so many people out of poverty within the country. They've built so much infrastructure. They've given aid to the people of South Africa in their fight against apartheid. They gave aid to the people of Ireland in their struggle for independence. They gave aid to the people all over the world who fought against imperialism, the Palestinians, in their struggle against Zionism and imperialism. Iran is a bastion of resistance to Western capitalism and imperialism. And that's why Iran and Venezuela are getting closer and more friendly, because they are both anti-imperialist revolutionary countries. That's why Iran is getting closer to Russia and China. That's why Iran is getting closer to Cuba. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a bastion of anti-imperialism. And Qasem Soleimani was somebody who was involved in trying to protect the religious minorities of Iraq, the Christians, the Shia, trying to defend those communities. He was in Iraq in hopes of talking for peace, and he was murdered on the way to the airport. It was a cowardly act. They tried to say he was plotting some kind of attack against the United States. That was not the truth. That was simply not the truth. It was not the truth at all. It was false, right? Qasem Soleimani was trying to negotiate peace. He was trying to make Iraq more peaceful, and he was cut down and killed. And it revealed Donald Trump to be a completely cowardly person. Right? Donald Trump came into office blasting Saudi Arabia, blasting the U.S. policies around the world for expanding terrorism, saying that he was going to stop meddling in countries around the world. But when Donald Trump was facing impeachment, when he faced a rising opposition from the neocons in his own party, All of a sudden, he acted like a complete coward, and with the support of Israel and Mike Pompeo, he committed a cowardly act and assassinated someone who was admired. And all over the world today, people are marching in support of Qasem Soleimani. In Iraq, you should see the huge demonstrations where people are marching through the streets with pictures of Qasem Soleimani. You should see what's happening in Syria as people are marching through the streets. And in Lebanon, people are marching through the streets with pictures of Qasem Soleimani, right? Qasem Soleimani is viewed as a hero in so many parts of the world because of the role that he's played in defeating ISIS terrorists, defeating Al Qaeda, fighting for the oppressed, protecting Christians, protecting religious minorities, trying to unify the Muslims of the world against terrorism. So we need to remember how cowardly the act that Donald Trump carried out really was. We need to remember that the Islamic Republic of Iran doesn't want a war, but they know very well that the United States is trying to lure them into a war. They wrote a letter to the UN Security Council pointing out that the United States is possibly going to engage in some kind of false flag attack to spark a new war before Trump leaves office. There's a very, very real danger that Donald Trump will try to provoke a war with Iran right before he leaves office as a final favor to the Israel lobby and to the fracking companies and the weapons manufacturers and the Likud party in Israel and the folks he's aligned with, that Donald Trump will take a dramatic move before he leaves office. This is very, very frightening, and we should all be deeply concerned about the danger of a new war, right? If some incident happens, and the U.S. media immediately blames Iran for it, all of us need to immediately not drink the Kool-Aid. Immediately say, "Whoa, what's really going on here?" Because we all need to be on our guard, because it appears that Trump is with a faction that really, really wants to escalate the Middle East against Iran. Look, tensions with Iran have been great for Israel. For years, throughout that region, one thing that all the Muslim countries could agree on, Arabs, Persians, Sunnis, Shia, right? They could all agree that they were against Israel and what Israel was doing to the Palestinians, whether it was the Saudis, the Kuwaiti monarchy, Ba'athist Arab socialists, Shia Muslims, all of them could agree that Israel was not a friend of the Arab people, not a friend of Muslims, not a friend of Kurds, not a friend of anyone in that region. That was understood until recently. Until recently. Until recently, that was understood. But because Donald Trump has done his best to polarize the region against Iran and create an Arab NATO and arm the Saudis and escalate the tension between Sunnis and Shias and escalate the Saudi regime and its allies and their tension with the Islamic Republic of Iran and its allies. Because of that effort, now we have a situation where the United Arab Emirates is recognizing Israel. We have a situation where Bahrain is recognizing Israel, and Israel and Saudi Arabia are getting closer to each other. So this tension with Iran, this polarization of the Middle East against Iran, with all the oil selling weapons, U.S. weapons buying regimes, all of them kind of lining up against Iran and stirring up religious bigotry, telling Sunni Muslims to hate Shia Muslims. All of that is setting the stage for Israel to have more power and influence around the region, and to be more widely accepted in the region. It is Israel that is benefiting from this, right? And I mean, we saw this, right? I mean, it didn't start with Trump. What we saw in Hillary Clinton's emails, it was leaked where Hillary Clinton said that a Sunni-Shia war would be in Israel's interest, right? This was leaked. This was in Hillary Clinton's emails. So these things are facts, and it is a very, very dangerous situation. So we should all have our eyes on the situation with Iran, as well as the situation with Julian Assange and the extradition hearing and the decision that's coming down tomorrow. We are living in very, very pivotal times. A lot is at stake in our current world, so we need to be vigilant, keep our eyes on top of current events, and make sure that those of us who are committed to opposing imperialism and wanting justice for working people and standing with oppressed people everywhere, that we don't let our guard down, right? We don't go into January, February remission. We don't hibernate this winter and what remains of the winter. Those of us who are committed to opposing imperialism need to do everything we can to raise our voices. Look, the Center for Political Innovation, on our next web conference, we are going to have speakers from Iran. We're going to have Iranian youth, Iranian students will address the Center for Political Innovation and give their perspective about what's really going on, what their country is like, etc. Just like the last web conference we did with CPI, we had a speaker from India, from the Communist Party of India, Marxist. Let him give his perspective. Next call, we're going to have students from Iran, and we are definitely in everything we do opposing war and opposing imperialism. France's involvement in the Middle East. Now, another thing I wanted to discuss here in my opening remarks, dangism. Another thing I wanted to discuss here in my opening remarks is neoliberalism. Because there's a lot of confusion about what neoliberalism is. I still see people who think neoliberal means moderate Democrat. The term neoliberal refers to an economic philosophy. It is a revival of classical economics. It is the belief that capitalism is best when it is completely unregulated, that get the government off our backs. The state should simply facilitate the making of profits by corporations. The state should not be involved in any efforts to correct social injustice. We need to shrink the role of the state and allow the free market to prosper. And that is neoliberal economic philosophy. And it has been around a long time. You can talk about the Austrian school that was in Europe during the 1930s and expressed a lot of sympathy for Hitler and Mussolini simply because they killed communists, while Hitler and Mussolini's economic policies were definitely not neoliberal policies. Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich von Hayek spoke very, very positively. Spoke very positively of fascism because they saw it as a barrier against communism. But you can speed up to Ayn Rand and the rise of the objectivist philosophy and how Ayn Rand, this extreme free market novelist, had her work promoted all across American media in the 1950s and 60s. She built almost a cult of people that were dedicated to opposing any form of altruism. You can talk about how Ayn Rand was the mentor to Alan Greenspan, and Alan Greenspan became one of the most powerful people in the U.S. economy, running the Federal Reserve and running the Council on Foreign Relations for decades. You can talk about Milton Friedman, Twitter. Hey, all good, Joseph. Don't worry. You can talk about Milton Friedman and how he was hailed as just this great economist, the father of Chicago school economics, right? Milton Friedman, and how he was promoted all across U.S. media. This is neoliberal economics, and it is a joke. Right? It is a complete joke. If there weren't huge amounts of money promoting this garbage, no one would believe it. Let me just lay some basic facts on you, folks. What was the greatest period of economic expansion in all of human history? What was the greatest period of economic expansion in all of human history? That would be the post-World War II economic expansion, right? After World War II, once the war was over, after there was mass destruction and death and the Nazis were defeated and the Japanese fascists were defeated, there was a huge explosion of economic growth. Huge explosion. And what also were the economic policies that were dominant in the world during this greatest period of economic growth? Well, First of all, it was the height of global communism. China became a communist country and began, policies of state-run planned economy. All of Eastern Europe, all of the Eastern European countries joined the socialist camp. You had the rise of Ba'athist Arab socialism in the Middle East during the 50s and 60s. You had Cuba becoming a socialist country. So all across the world, communism was at its heyday, and economic growth was at its height. Plus, in Europe, what was going on? Were there free market neoliberal policies happening in Europe? No. This was the heyday of the welfare state and social democracy. Britain launched its national health care service in 1945. France started giving guaranteed employment. Norway and Sweden set up huge welfare states. So the social democratic welfare states were also at their height. Again, no free market policies. What else? This was the period of the Bonapartist regimes throughout the Third World. Perón in Argentina, Park Chung-hee in South Korea. So all across the world, in the period when there was the greatest economic expansion in all of human history, nobody practiced neoliberal economics. If neoliberal economics leads to growth, why is it that the time in human history when there was more growth than ever before was the time when free market policies were the least practiced? I'm glad you like my book. I'm going to read from it later. I'll have to check out Daniel Ellsberg. Thank you. But if free market neoliberal policies lead to growth, okay, Whitaker Chambers, okay. Whitaker Chambers, Gaddafi. If neoliberal policies lead to economic growth, then why was it that the period with the greatest economic growth in all of human history was also a period in which there was simply no neoliberalism anywhere in the world? Furthermore, we have seen neoliberal economic policies in practice. Chile adopted neoliberal economics after the coup in 1973, when Pinochet was installed, when the military overthrew the Chilean government. Pinochet came into office. He murdered all kinds of communists, rounded them up in a sports stadium, and tortured them. And Pinochet then implemented neoliberal economic policies. He cut food subsidies, and there was malnutrition all across Chile. Children would faint in school because they did not have enough food. There are a number of children who were born during this period in Chilean history who became permanently mentally disabled because they did not have adequate nutrition as children. The average Chilean family spent 70% of their income on food. There was a huge rise in homelessness. It was a catastrophe. 30% unemployment. The dramatic adoption of neoliberal economics in Chile during the 1970s was an absolute disaster. But libertarians and adherents of neoliberalism will say, it was the Chilean economic miracle. The Chilean economic miracle that they described did not happen until 1985. Right? Chile adopted neoliberal economics in 1973. It wasn't until 1985 that they saw any significant growth, and that was long after Pinochet had kicked Milton Friedman out of the country, long after the Pinochet regime had started renationalizing things because it was on the brink of complete meltdown and destruction. So in Chile, we saw economic genocide carried out. Better backdrops, better, thank you. We saw economic genocide carried out. Carried out. And libertarians think it was a success. Literally millions of people died from malnutrition, from political repression, from not having access to food, from the huge rise in crime. Chile was demolished in the 1970s. The middle class, the industrial middle class of good-paying miners and metal workers was demolished. It was a disaster, but Chile was just the first place they implemented it. In the 1980s and especially in the 1990s, all across Latin America, neoliberal economic policies were implemented. Jeffrey Sachs, who is now kind of a Keynesian and a progressive. At that point, he went to Bolivia. He went all over Latin America implementing neoliberal policies. And they were disastrous. And, in 1999, two countries had depressions, huge depressions. I visited one of those countries when I was 12 years old. I went to Ecuador. And in Ecuador, I saw mass starvation and death. Never had I seen that many starving, desperate, hungry people. What had happened? Ecuador had been forced by the IMF and the World Bank to give up their currency and adopt the US dollar. They had privatized and cut government spending. Their crops had failed due to what they call El Nino, which was a weather phenomenon. The Asian markets and Asian investment had stopped because the Asian markets had collapsed. And so in Ecuador, you had an episode of mass malnutrition. Hundreds of thousands of people fled the country. People died in mass. It was a disaster. Argentina had free market neoliberal policies. In 1998, 1999, their economy completely collapsed. You can Google this, the Great Depression of Argentina. This is the result of what happened when you implement these policies. Read about the Great Depression of Argentina, how the IMF looted the country, how the country collapsed under the weight of these neoliberal policies. People were starving, people were dying on the streets. Right? And where else did they implement them? After the fall of the Soviet Union, these policies were implemented, right? In Eastern Europe, right? Country after country, they would go in, then privatize all the state-run assets, let American companies come in, and just ruined it. In Russia, 80,000 factories closed their doors, 80% of the collective farms in Russia shut down, mass unemployment, mass hunger. I know people who visited Russia during that time. And they describe how outside of every subway stop in Russia, there would be a crowd of elderly people, old people, trying to sell you their clothes. They would have their clothes, and they would try to sell you their clothes so they could eat. These are elderly people who worked their whole life, pensioners. Well, they'd lost their pension because of the swift implementation of free market reforms, and they would try to sell you their clothes, or they would try to sell you old newspapers and just beg outside of the subways, beg for anything. Russia lost 10% of its population in the 1990s. 10% of its population either left the country or died, right? Mass deaths from drugs, mass deaths from poverty, sex trafficking. It was economic genocide. Economist Anders Gunter Frank called it economic genocide. And that's what happened in Russia and in Eastern Europe. Cities in Ukraine would only have electricity for like 2 hours a day. It was a complete disaster. Poland and Czechoslovakia and so many countries, Romania, they implemented free market policies, and it wrecked the country. Everywhere we have seen neoliberal economic reforms, it has led to complete and utter disaster. It has led to complete and utter disaster. Haiti is a country that was forced to join NAFTA. It was basically forced by the Clinton administration to allow free trade policies, to stop subsidizing its farmers, and to allow American agribusiness, and it destroyed Haiti. Right? In Haiti, there used to be a lot of farmers who, grew their own food and sold it. Well, thanks to joining the free trade neoliberal agreement, neoliberal reforms destroyed Haiti's agricultural sector, and it led to mass poverty in Haiti. And in fact, in Haiti right now, there are people who literally eat dirt mixed with oil in order to survive. That is a common thing in Haiti, people eating dirt. That is the result of neoliberal economics, right? Many, many places you can see the results of economic neoliberalism. Right? It is a failed economic policy. It is a completely failed economic policy. Naomi Klein's shock doctrine talks about this. Philip Thayer, he has a very good book called Europe Since 1989 that talks about the results in Europe. There's all kinds of well-documented research on this, that neoliberal, free market, Austrian school economics does not work. It has been a complete and utter failure everywhere it has been implemented, from Chile to Bolivia to Argentina to Ecuador to Lithuania to Poland to Russia, everywhere. Everywhere these policies are implemented, it results in making people poorer. It results in mass starvation and death. It's these are genocidal economic policies, right? Really, if you want to understand why neoliberal economics does not work, let me just ask you a question. If I have 2 and I add 2 to it, I get 4, correct? If I have 2 and I add 2 to it, I get 4, right? Right. Now, if I have 4 and I take 2 away, I have 2, right? And 2 is less than 4. 2 is less than 4. Cutting does not lead to economic growth. And the basis of neoliberal economics is the belief that you can cut your way into economic growth. That is what libertarians believe, that if you cut the jobs of government workers, if you cut social programs that help low-income people, if you cut government spending on things like schools and housing and healthcare, if you cut, that creates growth. And it has never worked anywhere. If you have 4 and you take away 2, you have 2. And 2 is less than 4. You cannot create economic growth by cutting. You cannot cut your way into economic growth. It does not work. And it didn't work in Chile, and it didn't work in Bolivia, and it didn't work in Argentina, and it didn't work in Eastern Europe, and it didn't work in Russia, and it doesn't work in the United States. Right? If you get rid of the good-paying jobs, if you privatize the school system and replace it with charter schools where teachers get paid far lower and don't have union representation, and if you set up a situation where corporations can take jobs overseas and get rid of good-paying jobs, if you implement right-to-work laws that weaken labor unions and make it so they can't really have any power, if you implement policies where the government is no longer spending money on things like food stamps and no longer providing people with basic services, right? If you replace government employees with volunteers, that's a big policy, right? Let's cut the jobs of sanitation workers and have all the high school kids go clean the streets to make them be patriotic and loyal to their country, right? If you cut government spending, if you cut government subsidies, the result is poverty. People are worse off. Now, the way it is supposed to work is that, according to libertarians, if you cut government spending, the taxes are less. And if the taxes are less, then people can spend more money. Except it doesn't work that way, because the ultra-rich, first of all, are not paying their fair share of taxes to begin with. But the ultra-rich, the folks with lots and lots of money, who, as a result, pay a bigger percentage of taxes, if those folks have to pay less money in taxes, they don't spend it. They put it away. They put it in their Swiss bank account. They put it in their account on the Cayman Islands. They don't hoard their money. You and me, yes, if we get more money, we're going to spend it, right? If we get a raise at work, we're going to start spending more money. We're going to buy more stuff. We're going to have a more fruitful life. But people who are already super wealthy, if you cut government spending, they don't automatically, if you cut the amount of taxes they have to pay, they don't automatically start spending that money, right? They are the investor class, meaning that they invest money based on a return in profits. That's why they invest their money. And if they're not seeing a return in profits in the market, they're not going to invest their money, right? They don't live off of their money. They have enough money that they don't have to live off of their money, right? Their millions and billions, they don't live off of it, right? And they only invest it if they can see a return on their investment. And if the economy is bad, If the economy is bad, they're not going to invest. So if you cut in a time of economic crisis, when there is low spending, when people are impoverished, when wages are going down, when the stock market is going down, if you then cut government spending massively, and as a result lower taxes on rich people, all that results in is rich people putting more money into their hoards, right, into their bank accounts. That's all that it results in. Those rich people are only going to invest that money if they can see a return on that investment. And when the economy is having a downturn, they're not going to see a return on that investment, so they're going to sit on top of it. And then what happens, right? Capital, you'll have to remember, depreciates over time due to inflation. So that money that they have that they're not spending is going to sit in their bank account, and gradually it'll be worth less and less and less because of inflation. So this is a completely failed economic policy. Neoliberal, free market, Austrian school economics does not work. It doesn't work, but a lot of people believe in it. It has been widely promoted. And people get angry about this. Richard Wolff gets angry about this. People who actually understand economics get angry about this because this is not good economics. This is junk economics, right? It's just junk economics. Neoliberal economics is junk economics. It is not real economics, right? The whole field of economics is responding to the fact that it doesn't work, right? That the market doesn't naturally take care of itself. There's a concept in economics that they've talked about for hundreds of years. It's called market failures. Market failures, that the market does not always work. There are things called market failures. And how do you deal with market failures? John Maynard Keynes, the British economist, right? His whole career was about how do you deal with market failures and underconsumption, right? All kinds of schools of economics have developed out of how do we deal with market failures. But neoliberal economics is predicated on this notion that there's no such thing as market failures. Oh no, the market never fails. The market never fails. If the market is just left to its own devices, there's no boom-bust cycle, there's no financial panics, there's no financial crashes. And this is an illusion, right? Prior to the creation of the Federal Reserve, they had a financial meltdown and panic on Wall Street every few years. They would have one, right? And the boom-bust cycle, based on the Marxian concept of overproduction, happens all the time. And the Federal Reserve System and all kinds of mechanisms were created to try and stabilize a naturally unstable system. Well, neoliberalism says, oh no, if the market is just left to its own devices to take care of itself, everything just magically works out. And that's not the case. And it drives me crazy that neoliberal economics is so widely believed and promoted. And what also drives me crazy is that many people on the so-called left, many Marxists and leftists, don't challenge the lies of neoliberal economics. And in fact, some of them actually seem to kind of believe it, right? This worker cooperatives crowd that Vosch is part of, they want profits to remain in command. They don't understand that markets and profits don't bring about the solution in many cases. They don't understand that you need government oversight. They don't understand that. Right? And they're more concerned about opposing Stalinism and fighting for the freedom of the workers or something like that. They're more concerned about screaming against state socialism than they are with pointing out the failures of the market, right? The whole reason socialism exists is because profits in command leads to a situation called the anarchy of production. It does not work. The anarchy of production. When profits are in command, when money is the dictating force in why things get produced, it leads to a completely chaotic situation where people are homeless because there are too many houses, where people are hungry because there's too much food, where people are cold in the winter because there are too many coats, right? People are cold in the winter because there's too much heating gas, right? This is the basis of the problems of capitalism. And the capitalists sometimes try to manage it, and socialism wants to eliminate the rule of profits. Socialism wants a system where production is organized for public good, not for profits. That's what socialism is. No, socialism is not every company shares the profits in a worker co-op. Socialism So worker co-ops are good. I'm not against them, but they're not the essence of socialism. Socialism is getting rid of profits and command. It's when the means of production, the banks, factories, and industries, the centers of economic power, are organized to serve public good and not profits. And it was socialism in the Soviet Union that made the USSR a global superpower, that defeated the Nazis, that industrialized extremely rapidly, that wiped out illiteracy, that built huge power plants and electrified the country, that had the best steel manufacturing in the world, that had the films of Sergei Eisenstein, had ballet, huge achievements in the arts, and I mean if you look at what the USSR accomplished very, very quickly in the 1930s, how the population was mobilized to rapidly raise the country to the level of an industrial superpower, it pokes a big, big hole, in the fraud of neoliberal economics. The fraud of neoliberal economics, the myth of the 20th century is the underlying point in every economic discussion in the United States. Every economic discussion in the United States is predicated on the idea without capitalism, without profits in command, you can't have economic growth. And that is bull honky. That is complete bull honky. You can have economic growth, massive economic growth, without profits. Technology causing unemployment, right? Right? That you can have economic growth without profits in command. You can have massive economic growth without profits in command. And Russia, China, Cuba, I mean, many countries around the world. Gaddafi's Libya, with its massive achievements in terms of eliminating poverty and raising, construction and building the world's biggest irrigation system. There are many examples of systems where profits are not in command, having massive economic growth. And we've been told all our lives that if profits are not in command, if you don't have a profit-centered economy, then you can't have growth. And that is a lie. It's a complete and utter lie. You can have economic growth without profits in command. In fact, not having profits in command leads to greater economic growth. It opens the door to huge levels of expansion by eliminating the problem of overproduction and the boom-bust cycle. So on that note, folks, I thought I would end my opening remarks tonight by reading to you from City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. This is my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. And in this book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, I write about why China is socialist and what China has achieved, and I explain China. And I get many people, look, folks, with all due respect, I'm going to try to be as polite as I can here when I say this, but if you don't agree with me, that's fine. But I do not owe you an individual argument, okay? I get people I've never met before who have like 10 Twitter followers message me, "Why is China socialist, you retard?" And it's like, do you think I'm going to reply to that? Do you think I'm going to go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop what I'm doing and make the case," right? I mean, no, I don't owe every jerk who sends me a direct message a response, and I'm not going to do that. Another thing that I particularly don't appreciate is when someone asks me a question like, what is it? Just point of information, the Irish Republican Socialist Party is now the fastest growing party in Ireland. Oh, okay. Fastest growing party. Another thing is if people ask me, is China socialist, and I send them my articles and writings on this, they say, well, I don't want to read this. I just want to argue with you here. No, I've written articles about this. I've given speeches. I put in a great deal of work into it. No, I don't owe you a recap, right? If you're not willing to read articles I've written about this or listen to presentations and speeches I've made about this, if you want me to just sit there on Facebook or Twitter direct messages and recite to you my arguments, I'm not going to do that. I've got better things to do than that, right? Now, if you ask me a serious, question in good faith, right, and I point you toward articles and you read them, that's one thing. But when people message me, right, why, just some kind of like assumptive, insulting, question with, curse words in it or something, I'm not going to reply to you. I have written extensively. I have done huge amounts of research. I have written books and given lectures on these topics. And if you want to know my position on it, whether you agree or not, look, I know there's people who don't agree with me about China. Okay, I know that, and that's okay. But if you want to read what I've written about China and engage with it, by all means, go right ahead. Go right ahead. But if you expect me, if you send me a message, "Oh, why is China socialist? You dumbass." Well, I'm not going to reply. I'm not going to reply to you. You don't get a response. But I have written this book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, where I talk about China and why it's socialist. And so, even though this will be a little bit longer than I normally do because it's not a short section, I am going to read to you from City Builders and Vandals about why China is socialist. This is from the opening essay of City Builders and Vandals, and after you read this, you will understand why China is socialist. China's Great Adjustment. The organization, founded by Mao Zedong and his comrades in the basement of a women's college dormitory in 1921, now has over 90 million members and rules over the largest country on earth in terms of population. The Chinese Communist Party has presided over one of the greatest economic miracles in history. While the Marxist governments of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe crumbled in the 1980s, the Chinese Communist Party was getting stronger. The Chinese Communist Party is now arguably the most powerful political organization in the world, with no other entity exercising as much authority and operating in such a disciplined manner. The Chinese Communist Party came to power in 1949 and achieved solid economic achievements for the population in its first years. With Soviet assistance, Mao Zedong built the first steel mills in China, along with a network of power plants, water treatment facilities, and other critical infrastructure. While completing a new stage of development, which Mao referred to as New Democracy, the Chinese Communist Party mobilized the population to wipe out opium addiction, prostitution, venereal disease, and other social ills. Women were granted the right to vote and the right to divorce, and allowed to become part of the political process. Land was redistributed to peasants, and eventually the peasants combined their independent tracts of land into communes and collective farms. University education greatly expanded and illiteracy was wiped out. As Deng Xiaoping explained, quote, "In 8 years, between 1949 and 1957, we had completed the socialist transformation of agriculture, handicrafts, and capitalist industry and commerce, and thus entered the state of socialism." However, the Soviet Union cut its ties with China's leadership in 1961, withdrawing all of its economic assistance. Only Albania fully sided with China against the Soviet Union. Blueprints were burned, buildings were left half-built, and the efforts to modernize the country slowed very dramatically. In response to the Soviet Union's betrayal, the Chinese Communist Party launched a campaign against revisionism and rightism. These efforts to be more revolutionary than the Soviet Union resulted in the rise of deeply problematic elements within the Chinese Communist Party. The rhetoric of these figures paralleled the synthetic left in Western countries. While their language seemed to be infused with communist ideology, they were largely unconcerned with raising living standards and fixated on punishing and purging people. The peak of the ultra-leftist deviation within the Chinese Communist Party came in the final years of Mao Zedong's life with the rise of the Gang of Four. The urban youth were deported from the cities and sent to the countryside to engage in farm labor. The Gang of Four cultivated a culture of public humiliation and torture. The rules were unwritten in an atmosphere of mob rule, where people were encouraged to shame and publicly torture their co-workers for behaviors such as wearing makeup, listening to Western music, owning anti-communist books, or not showing proper loyalty to Mao. Instead of trying to raise China's population from poverty, the Gang of Four focused on attempting to make a still deeply poor and underdeveloped country more egalitarian and pure in its application of revolutionary principles. The Gang of Four argued that economic development was not necessary to advance toward communism, saying it was possible to transition in poverty to a higher stage. The pivot in China's political and economic model began in 1976, a few months prior to the death of Mao Zedong. It was the funeral of a prominent Chinese communist leader named Zhou Enlai that marked the turning point. Zhou Enlai had been alongside Mao Zedong on the Long March and helped lay the foundations of the People's Republic with him. Zhou Enlai was viewed as a moderate who occasionally restrained the Gang of Four's extremism, and his funeral became an outpouring of grief from educated young people who were deeply worried about the future of their country and felt stifled by the chaotic political atmosphere. Chinese engineers, college professors, scientists, and innovators sobbed for Zhou Enlai. The crowds at the funeral in Beijing broke into an explosion of anger and rioting that put the Communist Party on notice to a deep problem. Just like in Eastern Europe, the socialist system was stagnating. Creativity was being held back. The Soviet-style command economy desperately needed to be adjusted. These riots, and the death of Mao shortly afterward, paved the way for Deng Xiaoping to march into power in 1978. Deng ended the Cultural Revolution and launched his reform and opening up, heralded by the often quoted slogan, "Poverty is not socialism, but to be rich is glorious." In 1980, Deng Xiaoping explained a new strategy for building up Chinese socialism. Quote, "The fact that China is poor, has weak economic foundations, and is backward in education, science, and culture means that we have to go through a hard struggle. We want to make use of foreign funds and technology and to actively expand our foreign trade, but we must rely primarily on our own efforts. We are opposed to those absurd reactionary concepts of impoverished socialism, transition in poverty to a higher stage, and making a revolution in poverty, as touted by Lin Biao and the Gang of Four." Write down the super chat, Lu Shaoqi. Okay. But we are also opposed to the idea of turning China into a so-called welfare state right now, because that's impossible. We can only improve our standard of living gradually on the basis of expanded production. It is wrong to expand production without raising the people's standard of living, but it is likewise wrong, in fact impossible, to raise people's living standards without expanding production. Deng gave particular attention to the strata of intellectuals who had been the basis of counter-revolutionary confusion in other socialist countries at the time. Quote, "Our teachers and scientists are faced with many difficulties in their living conditions, which urgently need to be overcome. Many intellectuals who are capable earn well over 100 yen a month. Given slightly better working and living conditions, they would be able to solve many problems for the state and the people and create immense additional wealth. I could cite many other examples." Instead of stifling the intellectuals, the Chinese Communist Party found ways to utilize their skills in order to create economic growth. Model cities sprung up in places like Shenzhen. Foreign investment poured into the country. As living standards began to rise dramatically, it was clear that poverty socialism and the Cultural Revolution was dead, and socialism with Chinese characteristics was in bloom. Many observers have argued that China became capitalist following Deng Xiaoping's 1978 reform and opening up. However, this is not the case. Engels described the nature of capitalism, writing, "Under capitalism, the means of production function only as preliminary transformation into capital." Mao Zedong, founder of the Chinese Communist Party, defined the capitalist system as profits in command. Capitalism is a system in which the major centers of economic power function in order to make profits for those who own them. Socialism, on the other hand, is a system of rationally organized production. Frederick Engels explained the nature of socialism this way, quote, "The proletariat seizes the public power, and by this means of transformation, starting again with the quote. The proletariat seizes the public power, and by means of this transforms the socialized means of production, slipping from the hands of the bourgeoisie into public property. By this act, the proletariat frees the means of production from the character of capital they have thus far borne, and gives their socialized character complete freedom to work itself out. Socialized production upon a predetermined plan becomes henceforth possible." To be clear, socialism is not synonymous merely with state ownership. State ownership exists to some degree or other in every capitalist economy. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, state ownership is very prevalent. However, the state-run oil company in Saudi Arabia simply generates revenue for the royal family. The Saudi government simply plays the role of facilitating oil production carried out in order to make profits for the royal family. In the aftermath of the Second World War, many major industries were nationalized in Britain so that they could be rebuilt with public funds. However, the state-owned postal service, railways, power plants, and coal mines of post-war Britain existed simply to facilitate capitalist enterprises and their ability to make profits. The means of production still operated on the basis of preliminary transformation into capital, despite large-scale state involvement. The nature of socialism is defined by socialized production upon a predetermined plan. Under socialism, rational planning allows production to take place according to the interests of society overall. Deng Xiaoping was very clear that the socialist nature of China's economy would not change despite the introduction of foreign investment and private enterprise. He explained, "At present, some people, especially young people, are skeptical about the socialist system, alleging that socialism is not as good as capitalism." Right. Writing it down. Such ideas must be firmly corrected. The socialist system is one thing, and the specific way of building socialism is another. Counting from the October Revolution of 1917, the Soviet Union has been engaged in building socialism for 63 years, but it is still in no position to boast about how to do it. It is true that we don't have enough experience either, and perhaps it is only now that we have begun in earnest to search for a better road. Nevertheless, the superiority of the socialist system has already been proved, even though it still needs to be displayed in more, better, and more convincing ways. In the future, we must, and certainly will, have abundant facts with which to demonstrate that the socialist system is superior to the capitalist system. This superiority should manifest itself in many ways, but first and foremost, it must be revealed in the rate of economic growth and efficiency. Otherwise, there will be no point in trying to blow our own horn. And to achieve a high rate of growth and high efficiency, it is essential to carry out our political line consistently and unfalteringly. Despite market reforms, the Chinese economy remains state-controlled. The party continues to lay out 5-year economic plans. Major industries remain under public control. The government controls the banking sector and dictates the lending of money. Private companies receive instructions from the government and are not free to produce and operate simply according to the dictates of the market. A great example of the non-capitalist nature of the Chinese economy is the result of the stock market crash on July 8th and 9th of 2015. During these events, Chinese stock markets dropped by roughly 30%. Over 1,400 companies filed for a trading halt. The result of a similar drop on the New York Stock Exchange would be catastrophic. Food would stop being delivered. Society would come to a screeching halt. A 30% drop on the U.S. stock market would most likely result in riots in the streets, as 55% of the U.S. public is directly tied into the stock market. Nothing even close to this happened in China. China's stock market is not the center of the economy. The bulk of China's economic activity is centered around the government and its apparatus of state-owned banks and industries. The stock market functions simply as a kind of elite gambling casino for millionaires and billionaires and a mechanism for bringing in foreign capital. Less than 6% of the Chinese population is in any way tied to the stock market. The overwhelming majority of the Chinese people and economy is fully insulated from market turbulence. Great Reset. In 2015, after the Shanghai stock market crashed on July 8th and 9th, the government swept in with anti-selling measures to prevent a panic on the stock market. The Communist Party announced that anyone caught short selling would be arrested. All major shareholders were barred from selling stock for 6 months. The state-owned enterprises followed government direction and were carefully managed in their activities. As a result of the Communist Party stepping in and taking control, the Chinese stock market was speeding ahead, with numbers rising just a week after a collapse that the Western media predicted would be the long-awaited doomsday of the Chinese economy. Because the state has control, and the market exists simply to enhance the state's ability to expand the economy, the boom-bust cycle described by Marx in his analysis of capitalism is not a threat to China's growth. In China, profits are not in command. The Communist Party is. Explaining the nature of the Communist Party's achievements, Deng Xiaoping wrote, "China used to be described as a heap of loose sand. But when our party came to power and rallied the whole country around it, the disunity resulting from the partitioning of the country by various forces was brought to an end. So long as the party exercises correct leadership, it can rally not only its whole membership, but also the whole nation to accomplish any undertaking." The result of Deng Xiaoping's adjustment of the socialist system has been to raise 700 million people from poverty. It has also been the creation of state-controlled megacorporations like Huawei Technologies, now the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. China also has the largest hydroelectrical power plant on Earth, the Three Gorges Dam. The China Railways Corporation is now creating the fastest trains in the world, exporting and constructing high-speed railway across the world. In 2018, every day a new Chinese millionaire was created. China has many billionaires, but the billionaires do not rule. Every inch of the country is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and even some of the richest people have received the death penalty if they stand in its way. Poverty alleviation, scientific breakthroughs, and technological achievements have defined China in recent decades. Despite its dramatic economic successes, problems of corruption and violation of human rights continue to plague the country. The rise of Xi Jinping has marked a significant effort by the party to end bribery and enforce its regulations. When visiting the United States in September of 2015, President Xi Jinping explained that his widely maligned anti-corruption crackdown was necessary for China's growth, and he joked that it was nothing like the popular Netflix TV program House of Cards. Speaking to an audience in Seattle on September 22nd, he explained, "China will continue fighting corruption. As I once said, one has to be very strong if he wants to strike iron." The blacksmith referred to here is the Chinese Communist Party. The fundamental aim of the party is to serve the people's heart and soul. The party now has 87 million members, and unavoidably, it has got problems of one kind or another. If we let these problems go unchecked, we will risk losing the trust and support of the people. That is why we demand strict enforcement of party discipline as a top priority for governance. In our vigorous campaigns against corruption, we have punished both tigers and flies, corrupt officials, irrespective of ranking, in response to our people's demand. Xi has worked to adjust the Communist Party's relationship with religious groups. Under Xi Jinping's leadership, the Communist Party has restored relations with the Vatican and adjusted its policies in relations to Christians, Muslims, and Tibetan Buddhists. In 2019, China successfully landed a spacecraft on the far side of the moon. The Chang'e 4 mission utilized some of the most advanced cameras and satellite technology to achieve its historic results. The motivations for China's mission to the moon were not purely academic or scientific. The moon is home to a large deposit of a rare element called helium-3, which many believe could be utilized for fusion energy. Alternative energy seems to be an obsession of the Chinese Communist Party. When China announced its new regulations regarding automotive vehicles in 2017, the Wall Street Journal described them with a tone of shock, reporting, quote, "China has created the world's largest electric car market by sheer force of will." With these swift regulations, the Chinese government declared that 10% of all cars manufactured in China and imported into China must be fossil fuel free. China is now the leading creator of new energy vehicles. Sandra Retzker of the German Agency for International Cooperation was quoted as saying that when it comes to electric cars, China is the only one in the race. It's Chinese manufacturers. China is rapidly expanding the extraction of the minerals necessary for electric car batteries with its international partners. China's state-run mining corporations are teaming up with local African enterprises to expand production. The global oil-based apparatus of production is one of the greatest threats to China and one of the largest barriers to human progress. The global oil market is dominated by Chevron, BP, Shell, and ExxonMobil, the four British and American supermajor corporations that operate in the New York and London Stock Exchange. The big four supermajors are closely tied with big banks. ExxonMobil is the modern incarnation of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil and is closely tied to Chase Bank. British Petroleum is closely tied to HSBC Bank, the British House of Finance first established for the purpose of dominating the Chinese market, largely with opium imports. The autocratic kingdoms of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates have long functioned as vassals for Western oil bankers, as has the corrupt U.S.-backed government of oil-rich Nigeria. As a country rising up, or aside from a few OPEC outliers like Russia, Venezuela, and Iran, Western oil bankers of London and New York have cornered the international oil markets. Along with the French oil corporation Total, the big four U.S.-British oil monopolies control roughly 88% of the global oil market. As long as crude oil remains the primary fuel driving the global means of production and transportation, Wall Street and London will rule the world. As a country rising up from poverty and consuming more resources than ever before, China depends on a large amount of oil imports in order to maintain its state-controlled manufacturing apparatus. While some oil comes to China via pipelines from Russia, the majority of China's oil imports come via oil tankers on the South China Sea. The supposed escalation in the South China Sea is simply a matter of China working to secure its oil imports amid an increased U.S. military presence. China is also in the process of creating an intercontinental canal in Nicaragua in the hopes of reducing maritime dominance exercised by the USA via control of the Panama Canal. As long as China depends on oil, it remains vulnerable to Western penetration and threats. As a result of this unique position, China is necessarily and universally recognized as the primary promoter of energy and renewable resources. In 2015, 24% of China's electricity was generated by wind power. China is also the world's largest manufacturer of solar panels. China's most crucial foreign policy is its creation of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which carries out the projects of the Belt and Road Initiative. With Chinese assistance, countries across Africa, Central Asia, South America, and elsewhere have been able to build vital infrastructure like power plants, schools, railways, airports, water treatment facilities, and highways. This has resulted in a situation where the domestic economies of these long impoverished countries have been able to expand with new trade access. China's economic policies strongly differ from the neoliberalism of the IMF and the World Bank. While the Bretton Woods institutions push countries to strip down the government budget and reduce the role of the government, China is doing the opposite. China inflates the role of the state in developing countries, enabling them to more effectively stimulate domestic businesses. As developing countries become wealthier, China becomes wealthier at the same time. The model is referred to as win-win cooperation. Prior to the rise of the Atlanticist pathology and imperialism, various industrial capitalist economists in the United States and Europe, such as Alexander Hamilton, Henry Clay, and Friedrich List, proposed similar models for global trade. There should be no doubt that the Chinese Communist Party is guided by all things in Marxism-Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory, and Xi Jinping thought, which has recently been added to the party's constitution. The October-December 2018 issue of the Communist Party's theoretical journal, Kuixi, made the following declaration, quote, "The successful development of Chinese socialism in both theoretical and practical terms has put a spotlight on Marxism and socialism and inspired more of the world's people to believe in them. Going a step further, Chinese socialism now represents the mainstream of the world's socialist movement and has revived a sense of confidence within the people around the world. It is becoming a standard bearer for the development of scientific socialism in the 21st century and a pillar for the revitalization of world socialism." And that is the section on China from the opening essay of my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. So get your copy today. And that is my answer to the question of why China is socialist. I talked about how their stock market does not have a boom-bust cycle and how most of the population isn't tied into it and they can end, crises really dramatically. I talked about state control over industry. I talked about the 5-year plans. I talked about Deng Xiaoping and Marxism. I pretty much laid it all out there. After listening to that, you now know why China is socialist. This is my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, where I talk about many, many different issues. I talk about Marxism. I put Marxism in historical contexts. I talk about the Soviet Union and why it fell. I talk about a lot of things. So this is my book. Check it out. You'll learn a lot from it about the Marxist perspective on world events. And on that note, folks, that ends my opening remarks for tonight. So why don't we do our roll call? Names and locations. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who's here tonight? Who's with us? Names and locations. Joey from Belize is with us. Henderson, Nevada. Toronto. Great Talk. Lily in Atlanta. David in Italy, Boston, George in Manhattan, San Francisco, California, Chicago, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Oregon Coast, Rensselaer, New York, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn, Class Analysis, Oakland, California, Marta in Poland, Mo in Toronto, Vallejo, California, Sasha from Thailand, hello from West Palm Beach, Char Char Darling, Nassau County, Florida, The Real, Juan from Mexico, Denver, in the basement with my apple drink, New York, CPUSA represent, Shaw from Maryland, Clydebank, Pennsylvania, reading Angela Davis in the bathtub, Will Lotz, very good, Hong Kong, China, Manhattan, Kansas City, Southside, Winter and Shaniqua from Buffalo, New York, welcome, welcome, Vosh from Beverly Hills, welcome, welcome, Jack Dundee, UK, Space Communist, Florida, Mo in Pomona, California, Nowhere Particular, Australia, West Virginia, middle of nowhere, Michigan, Wazip, Long Island, New York, Marissa in Buffalo, New York, hi, Jack Smith, Mohsen from Iran, Korea, San Diego, here, Ukraine, Jack Dundee, Comintern, Chicago, upstate, Ryan in Canada, Jay from the UK, Philadelphia, Mario from Croatia, Melbourne, Australia, Joseph from Kamastan, David Fox in Bendigo, Australia. Welcome, David. Chennai in India, Sonora, Mexico, Wilmington, Delaware. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Leipzig, East Germany, Sydney, Australia, Sham, Cleveland Industrial Wasteland. Yes, I am here, Northern California, Pendleton, Oregon, Beijing, Richard, Alan Lee is with us. Very, very good, folks. Kieran from San Diego is with us. Vancouver, Canada, Skippy the Bear in Utah. I am Vosh. No, you are not. Australia, Legend of Shanghai, Toronto, Canada, Awesome World Citizens. Welcome, 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 welcome. Cheers. Who else is with us tonight? Who else is with us? Always a pleasure to do these lives and interact with our lovely community. Naples, Florida. Harold is with us. Very good. Very, 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 very good. Very, very good. All righty, folks. Well, you have asked a number of Super Chat questions, so I will proceed to start answering your Super Chat questions, and they won't be as short as the answers as they were last time because I have more energy. I'm far more energized tonight than I was last time. So I will give you some longer answers, not necessarily on all of these, but there you go. All righty. Okay, but keep them rolling in, folks. I'll keep answering your questions. If you got Super Chat questions, Super Chats to send in, I will keep answering them. So keep them rolling in, and let's do our thing. All right, liberals are tone deaf to COVID. Absolutely, right? I mean, liberals, they've made it a right-wing thing to be concerned about the jobs of restaurant workers and the jobs of people that are shut down by this pandemic. I'm sorry, but it's not a right-wing thing, right? You can recognize that COVID is real. You can recognize that there needs to be a response, but there needs to be an effort to bail out the people. They bailed out all the big banks, but there you go. All right. How can someone attend the World Festival of Youth and Students? That's a good question. Attend. All right. Yes, absolutely. Liberals are tone deaf about it. They've decided it's right wing to be concerned about what's going on. If you are concerned about what's happening to workers around the country, then you are simply you're simply right wing, and that's not the case, right? That is not the case, right? A lot of people are suffering right now. You should see the poverty in this city, how badly people have been hit. And no, I mean, we need to talk about how many working people are suffering. Bail out the people, not the big corporations. The fact that all the aid that was supposed to go to small businesses ended up, so much of it, not all of it, but a lot of it ended up in the hands of big corporations. That should be a big source of outrage, right? Absolutely right. Very good question. Syria conflict outlook. Well, one thing that has been made clear is that the Biden administration is fully committed to toppling the Syrian Arab Republic. The Trump administration couldn't make up its mind, right? They did seize the oil, they did seize Syria's oil, and one minute they were thinking about overthrowing Syria, the next minute they weren't. But it seems like the Biden administration is fully committed to regime change. Furthermore, Biden is probably going to try and restore relations with the Wahhabi groups, right? The Trump administration, it was even talking about putting the Muslim Brotherhood on the foreign terror list. It ripped up the Iran deal, and that, the Obama administration made a really big policy. All right, left KMT. Made a very big policy and a very big point of trying to utilize Wahhabi terrorists and others as proxies, right? And the Trump administration did a lot of things that offended Muslims around the world. Trump has made statements like Islam hates us and such. And so I expect that the Biden administration will try to repair U.S. relations with Wahhabis and with the Muslim Brotherhood for the purpose of overthrowing the Syrian government. That's one thing that's been made clear. All the people that were the people that engineered the Syrian civil war. Many of those people are now going to, people that were in the Hillary Clinton State Department are now moving into the Biden administration. So while the Trump administration was confused and erratic, I mean, they did bomb Syria, something Obama never did. Obama never directly attacked the Syrian Arab Republic. Now, Trump did that. Trump very much did that. So it's a very complex situation, but I expect that efforts to overthrow the Syrian Arab Republic are going to escalate under the new administration. That's my prediction. All right. I don't know who Mikhail Sislov was. I'll have to look that up. Force the vote failure. Well, look, I think the force the vote failure, right? We're all disappointed in AOC and the squad for how they just rolled over and voted for Nancy Pelosi. Right, but I think there's a bigger lesson here, a much bigger lesson. All right, I'll write that down. Vosh Hakeem stream. There's a much bigger lesson. And that is the response to Jimmy Dore for calling for force the vote was so over the top and so insane. It revealed a lot of the people in the socialist movement to be complete. Right. Syria regime change. To be just complete shills, right? It's one thing if they didn't agree with Jimmy Dore. They could say, well, I don't agree with Jimmy Dore there. But the way their over-the-top response, Jimmy Dore, how dare he? They just called him every nasty name in the book. They talked about his home. Oh my God, they went nuts. I have never seen anything like it. In every progressive circle, Jacobin, Jabba the Vosh, Young Turks, all of these shills, all these people, a lot of them who claim to be socialists, claim to be Marxists, claim to be progressives, they just unloaded everything they had on Jimmy Dore. How dare Jimmy Dore? How dare Jimmy Dore call for AOC to fight for Medicare for all? It was like, I have never seen anything like it. And what it did is it revealed that there is a lot of grifting going on. Folks, there is a lot of grifting going on. There are a lot of people that talk a progressive game so they can make money on social media. They know that, hey, they know that a lot of average rank and file Democrats want to hear a rah-rah Bernie Sanders kind of message. And that kind of helps the Democrats, right, to have their base fired up, to do more to fight against Donald Trump and to be, saying they're going to address people's needs. And so there is this whole milieu on the internet of phonies that have been created. Chapo Trap House, Jacobin, Young Turks, and it's this whole milieu of people that talk a good game, but when it's actually time to fight, and when it actually might hurt the Democrats, right? When it actually might cause people to question whether or not the Democrats are on their side or not, they're with the establishment. And that became abundantly clear. And they really overdid it. really, really overdid it. Like, it would be one thing. They could have just ignored Jimmy Dore. They could have just pretended he doesn't exist. That's what they often do to people, right? If somebody, if somebody is saying things that are out of the mainstream, they just ignore them, right? Um, uh, Uyghur stuff. If someone's doing things that are outside of the mainstream, they just ignore them. But they didn't just ignore Jimmy Dore. They wanted his public execution. I have never seen anything like it. I mean, it was like Jimmy Dore hath criticized the Democratic Party, thus he must be excommunicated from this earth and burned at the stake as a witch. He shall be burned at the stake for his crime of heresy against the great Democratic Party. All hail Nancy Pelosi. All hail Ocasio-Cortez. His execution shall take place at noon, and all shall be just. It was like, I have never seen anything like it. It was unbelievable, and they went so over the top with this. Like, how did it hurt them in any way? How did it hurt anything in any way for Jimmy Dore to, like, make demands on AOC? How? How did it, how, I mean, it was like, but their job, they had been told, basically, all these people who've been allowed to build these little social media cults, they have this big following, and they've all been told, don't make any real demands, take your orders from us, and Jimmy Dore wasn't following the script, and so he had to be hung, drawn, and quartered. I mean, it was like I had never seen anything like it, and it didn't work. Jimmy Dore is more popular than he was before. He's more well-known than he was before. His name's trending, and most Democrats, rank-and-file Democrats, agreed with Jimmy Dore. They dropped the ball. They shot themselves in the foot. But it exposed the fact. Everybody who was ragging on Jimmy Dore and calling Jimmy Dore a bad one, and everyone who was doing that, socialism and oligarchy. Everybody that was doing that has exposed themselves, has completely exposed themselves, right? And there were people that I enjoyed listening to and had more respect for. But when they started dumping on Jimmy Dore, I realized, oh, you're a shill, aren't you? You're a shill, aren't you? And they threw everything at Jimmy Dore. I mean, that was the moment that separated the sheep from the goats, so to speak. That was a moment. That was a moment where we learned where everyone stands, right? Some people talk one way, but when the rubber met the road, they were on the other side. And I'm kind of glad that happened. If all that was achieved was revealing where people stand, that's enough. I mean, that was big. That was very, very, very big. I'm so glad Jimmy Dore did that. Jimmy Dore was absolutely right with force the vote. Wow, it really shows where people stand. It really shows where people stand. All right, was Christ Palestinian? Well, he was in Palestine. So he was, by definition, Palestinian. He was born in Palestine, lived in occupied Palestine. At the time, Palestine was occupied by the Roman Empire. He was Jewish, but he was living in Palestine. So, yeah, I mean, this is before, this is like 2,000 years ago, not like 2,000 years ago. It was 2,000 years ago. So, yeah, was Christ Palestinian? I mean, he was living in the territory we today call Palestine. I think back then it was called, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was called Judea back then. So there you go. All right. All right. French involvement in the Middle East. Well, that's really interesting. Let me take you back to 2002, 2003, when George W. Bush was announcing he was going to invade Iraq. Right? I remember freedom fries. Do people remember freedom fries? Now, in the cafeteria of the U.S. Congress, they no longer served French fries. They were freedom fries because France didn't support the war in Iraq, and they were dirty, rotten, French people. We were all supposed to hate France. We were all supposed to hate France. France was our enemy. And Jacques Chirac, definitely not a leftist or an anti-imperialist, Jacques Chirac gave strong anti-war speeches at the UN. And what's going on there? What's going on there? There's another incident you should know about. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was in the 1980s. I don't want to give the wrong date. In the 1980s, Iraq has a nuclear power facility, right? The Ba'athist Arab socialist government of Iraq is building a peaceful nuclear energy facility. And without telling anybody, no announcement, nothing, Israel bombs and destroys this peaceful nuclear energy facility. And they kill a number of nuclear scientists in Iraq. But who else do they kill? A French citizen. Because the French government had a contract with the Iraqis to build that nuclear power facility, and a French citizen died at the hands of Israel when they bombed Iraq's nuclear power facilities. Very interesting. So there is clearly a difference among the Western imperialist countries when it comes to the Middle East and when it comes specifically to the issue of nuclear power. France is probably the most pro-nuclear power country in the world, other than China. China has the most nuclear power, but France, of all the Western countries, France is the most pro-nuclear power. Why? Because oil markets are dominated by the West, right? France has total, but that's very small compared to the big four super majors. American oil companies, American and British oil companies, Chevron, BP, ExxonMobil, right? Shell Oil, the four super major oil companies dominate the global markets. And nuclear energy is an alternative, right? It's a way of leading toward getting off of oil. The French nuclear energy or nuclear power program was actually started by a physicist who was a member of the Communist Party and won a Nobel Prize for his work in nuclear fusion and nuclear physics and nuclear energy, atomic energy. And France has a huge amount of nuclear power. So France likes nuclear power. Britain and the United States do not. And that is a major difference. And mainland Europe has long faced domination by the hands of the British, right? And there's a whole history of this. You go back to Napoleon, right? For example, right? Great thing. If you ever hear people that are anti-Semites, anti-Semitic folks, they always talk about the Rothschilds, right? Well, where does that come from? It comes from Napoleon, right? Napoleon, who was the military leader who led France in the aftermath of the Revolution, he was fighting against the British. The British were trying to control Europe, and Napoleon wanted to control Europe. And Napoleon ended up making the stupid mistake of invading Russia, and that was the end of Napoleon. But Napoleon, when he was justifying why he was fighting the British, he pointed out that the banking family in Britain, the Rothschilds, had a lot of influence. And he argued that the Rothschilds bankers were trying to dominate the world. And Napoleon said, we don't want the Rothschilds bankers to dominate the world. Now, he whipped up a whole bunch of anti-Semitism and hatred for Jews. And, the Rothschilds had nothing to do with them being Jewish, but there is a British banking family called the Rothschilds. And Napoleon whipped up anti-Semitism against them, in order to justify his war against the British. And what he was talking about was the fact that the mainland of Europe, was largely getting in debt to British banks, and that this was a problem, and that Napoleon wanted France and other countries to be sovereign and not in debt to British banks, right? And most British bankers are not Jewish, right? We're not talking about Jews here, okay? This is not an ethnic, racist conversation. We're talking about economics. We're talking about European history, right? The United States and Britain dominate the oil markets, and they dominate international finance. France and Germany and Italy and Luxembourg and Austria and many countries in Western Europe don't want to be dominated by British and American oil and banking, right? Wall Street, London Stock Exchange, think oil, think banking, right? Big oil bankers, big oil monopolies, right? Meanwhile, Europe, the European mainland, has long been struggling for independence from the domination of oil companies and banks in Britain and the United States. So France loves nuclear power. France loves nuclear power because nuclear power is not makes them not dependent on British and American oil companies. They're producing their own energy. So there's a long-standing difference between France and Britain, and between the mainland of Europe and Britain and the United States. Long-standing difference, and this is a long-standing aspect of geopolitics. The greatest fear of the British is that the Germans and mainland Europe would join with Russia. That's been their greatest fear. That's why the British were so determined to have Hitler come to power in Germany and not have a communist revolution in Germany in the 1920s. Because if Germany had joined with Russia, then the British would have lost their ability to dominate the European mainland. And that this is a long-standing trend. Now, when it comes to France in the Middle East, the French are a colonial power. They're an imperialist power, just like the Americans and the British. And there was a secret treaty, the Treaty of Sykes-Picot. This is very important in the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution was like the first WikiLeaks. Right? It was like WikiLeaks 1917. Right? The Bolsheviks come to power. They seize control of the government. One of the things the Bolsheviks did is publish all the secret treaties the Tsar's government had signed. One of those treaties was the Treaty of Sykes-Picot. And it was a treaty between all the countries that were aligned in World War I. The British, the French, the Russians, the Americans. And it carved up the Middle East and the map of the Middle East that we now have, where you have Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Oman and Kuwait and Iraq and Iran. That map was drawn up by the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And the Bolsheviks revealed it. It was a secret treaty. And the Bolsheviks made it public. They pulled a Julian Assange and they revealed it. And at the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Syria and Lebanon were given to the French. So those two territories, Syria and Lebanon, were under French domination. And it's actually quite interesting. It's the fact that Bashar Assad is the leader of Syria, right? Well, that has a lot to do with France. So when France occupied Syria, it gave people jobs and assigned people roles based on their ethnicity, right? This is something the colonizers always do. They try to divide the colonized people, right? They didn't say, oh, you're all Syrians. Oh, you're all Lebanese. Oh, no, no. They divided them on the basis of their religion and on the basis of their ethnicity. And in Syria, the French decided that if you were an Alawite, which is a religious group, it's a Shia form of Islam, but it's specifically they worship Ali, right? If you're an Alawite Muslim, you get military training. So Alawites got military training. Other Syrians did not. And in the 1950s and 60s, it was the military, folks, in the colonized countries. It was the folks in the military, the patriotic officers, who overthrew the governments and started creating socialism. In Egypt, Abdel Nasser led a patriotic officers' revolt in Egypt, overthrew the government, established Arab socialism. In Libya, Gaddafi led a patriotic officers' revolt, overthrew the government, and established socialism. In Iraq, you had the patriotic officers that brought Qasem to power, and eventually, out of that, the Ba'ath and that whole history. Well, in Syria, only the Alawites had been given military training because the French had this policy of treating different ethnic groups differently. So it was the Alawites who had the military training that overthrew the government and established the Ba'athist Arab government. Dual circulation currency plan. So, yes, the French role in the Middle East is very important. The French believe in nuclear power. The French were friendly to the Iraqi government. The French are big supporters of the Iran nuclear deal, which Trump has ripped up. I mean, there's a lot there. But, if you're talking about the role of the French in the Middle East, that's a big question. But I gave you a very, very long answer to that question. So there you go. Alrighty. Is Dangism the answer for North Korea? Well, Dangism is not a thing. I mean, there's Deng Xiaoping theory, which is part of the Chinese Communist Party's beliefs, but that's obviously not the answer for North Korea. But North Korea would like to have economic reforms. It's very clear. North Korea needs to get some foreign investment in there. The country is very poor. They're isolated from the global economy due to sanctions because they withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and proliferated nuclear weapons. They have been subject to sanctions from the UN Security Council for getting nuclear weapons. Um, but if they were to give up their nuclear weapons and rejoin the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, those sanctions would be lifted. Um, and so, for North Korea to get some foreign investment would be a good thing. You have to remember the North Korean population is very highly educated. Most North Koreans can speak more than one language, for example, right? There's a lot of coal in those mountains. There's a lot of very valuable minerals in those mountains in North Korea. And there's a lot of potential wealth in North Korea, but because they've been isolated from the global economy, because they've been cut off, they don't have the ability to really utilize their resources. So bringing them into the global market would be a good thing. Um, if North Korea were brought in, it would be different than the Vietnamese, market socialism. It would be different than Chinese, socialism with Chinese characteristics. They would do it their own way, right? As a country that's been through so much, they would do it their own way. They would come into the global economy their own way. But I think that, yeah, having some market reforms in North Korea would be a good thing. And I think that that's what the people of that's what the Korean Workers' Party pretty openly wants at this point. So there you go. All right. Someone is asking me about Lyndon LaRouche and China. Well, I don't speak for the Lyndon LaRouche organization. I'm a Marxist. They are not Marxists. They were a long time ago, but they no longer believe in Marxism. They were pretty supportive of Donald Trump. I have different views than they do. I don't think it's fair the way people characterize them. They are a group that very much at this point is functioning in kind of an anti-imperialist way. They are critical of U.S. foreign policy. They support the Belt and Road Initiative in China, but they're not Marxists. They have a very long, complicated history. They are their own organization. And I really enjoy, there are people in that group that are people I would consider to be friends of mine. But we don't agree with each other, and I'm not a follower of Lyndon LaRouche. I've studied his writings, but I don't agree with a lot of what he says. I'll just be honest. There's a lot of things that he says I don't agree with. So, I don't know why you're asking me about that, because I don't represent that group. If you have a specific question about that group and their beliefs and their ideology, you should direct it toward them, because I don't represent them. And I'm not a follower of Lyndon LaRouche. So, yeah, I don't really speak for them. So, yeah, I don't know what you want to know, because I'm not the guy to ask about it. They have their own beliefs, they have their own stuff, and I'm not them. Alrighty. All right, China picking the new Dalai Lama. I haven't followed the specific issues of that particularly, so I can't really comment on that. All right, Whitaker Chambers. Whitaker Chambers was kind of an intellectual in the 1920s. I think he's from Long Island, New York. And he joined the Communist Party of the United States, and then he quit. And then in the 1950s, he became a star witness for the House Un-American Activities Committee. And he eventually became the editor of National Review magazine, which is a neoconservative, right-wing magazine. He wrote an autobiography called Witness, and it was really religious. He had some kind of religious awakening, and that's why he became an anti-communist. He accused all kinds of people of being in the Communist Party, many of whom were not ever in the Communist Party, like Alger Hiss, and that was a little bit nuts. He's just a right-wing guy, conservative, anti-communist, and stool pigeon too. I mean, he was somebody who got up and this is a thing that happens, right? I mean, this has happened many, many times. Is like, the FBI or whatever will send somebody into a group, and those people, when they get up and testify on the witness stand, they don't say what they actually saw. They don't not say what they actually saw. They say what the prosecutors want them to say. Whitaker Chambers was probably not saying what he actually observed when he was in the Communist Party in the 1920s. He was saying what was good for Joe McCarthy and what was good for the House Un-American Activities Committee. And that, like, some of the stuff, you talk to some old communists, some of the stuff in Whitaker Chambers' memoir is so ridiculous. Like, one of the things that he talks about is, he says, in the Communist Party, there would be people who disagreed with the Communist Party. And then suddenly, they would get an invitation to go to Moscow, and they would never return. That didn't happen. So, yeah, Did not happen. So, it was, they disagreed with the party line. They got this mysterious invitation to Moscow and never came back. It's like, come on. Come on, really? Really? No, there were a lot of Americans who did relocate to the Soviet Union in the 1930s. That happened, but it's like, yeah, it's stupid. There's a movie called "I Was a Communist for the FBI." There's a movie called The Red Menace, and this stuff you look at it is so ridiculously over the top, um, so ridiculously over the top. There is some interesting ex-communist literature. The CIA published a book called "The God That Failed," and that's Richard Wright, who was a black intellectual who wrote, very good writer, wrote Native Son, and he quit the Communist Party. And Arthur Kessler, who'd been in the German Communist Party in the 1930s, and it's like a compilation of essays that was published in the 50s by ex-communists, and the CIA circulated it and published it. And you read some of those essays, they're criticizing groupthink, right? They're criticizing conformity and obedience. They're criticizing problems that develop in every organization. You know, these things happen. And I mean, look, probably and these are things to fight against, right? When people are struggling to survive, when people, especially in the 1930s and 20s, when people were joining the Communist Party, they were desperately poor, hungry people. You do get kind of a top-down, follow the leader atmosphere. Probably one of the most telling, anecdotes I ever heard about the Communist Party USA, and this kind of way it was, that this is kind of what these things actually happened. Okay, people didn't get disappeared to the Soviet Union if they disagreed, but there were, for example, this is an anecdote that I actually read in Nelson Peary in his autobiography. So Nelson Peary, a great communist writer, he ended up founding the Communist Labor Party. He was a Maoist, but he was in the Communist Party in 1948. He was in the Communist Party USA, and he tells this anecdote in his autobiography, Black Radical. And I believe it's true. And this is what he says. He says that, he went to the state convention of the Communist Party. And at the state convention of the Communist Party in Minnesota, it was like hundreds of people back then, and they were having resolutions to honor people and support people. They had resolution to support Stalin, and everyone voted yes, and resolution to support Mao in China, yes. So then they had a resolution at their state convention to honor Tito, Josip Broz Tito, the leader of socialist Yugoslavia. So they said, all right, resolution to honor Josip Broz Tito. And Nelson Peary, who had just joined the Communist Party, raised his hand and said, I don't think we should support this. I think that Tito is a revisionist like Earl Browder. And he says the room fell silent. It was dead silence in the room. And then they had a vote, and he was the only person to vote no. And then afterwards, someone took him aside and they said, we don't really think the party is right for you. You don't really seem to understand what the Communist Party is about. And he was kind of shocked. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. But then the next morning, the headline in the newspaper was, Stalin denounces Tito. Stalin denounces Tito. And so because of that, they forgot everything and they thought he must be really smart. And so he was welcomed back into the party and no one had any objections to it. That kind of shows, and that's true. I mean, back in those times, in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, there was an atmosphere in the Communist Party USA that was very, very kind of follow the leader, top down. But that atmosphere develops in a lot of organizations. I mean, churches, for example. Growing up, I was a member of a church, and it was often like that. They'd have votes where everyone voted exactly the same. And it's like, if someone votes differently, what's wrong with you? These kind of things happen, right? When people are struggling. The Communist Party in the 1930s, at one point, 1 in 3 people in the party, their income somehow depended on the party. Right? Whether that was selling the Daily Worker newspaper or they were a party union organizer or something, 1 in 3 members was somehow financially tied into the organization. And when you have a situation like that, and people are literally starving to death, and these are very, very poor people, these are immigrants, from Europe who were starving, and in the Bronx and in Brooklyn and in San Francisco and Chicago. And, you get a situation where people are going to be very, very follow the leader, right? And I mean, the early years of the Communist Party, there's a famous speech, Stalin's speeches to the Communist Party. If you read it, he yells at the Communist Party. Why does he yell at them? Because there were two factions in the Communist Party, two big factions. One was led by William Z. Foster, and the other was led by J. Lovestone. And both of the factions were claiming they were the Stalinist faction. And Stalin says to them, "Stop this. I did not endorse either of your factions. Now learn to get along." Right? But both of them in whispering, "We're the Stalinist faction. Stalin's the new leader. We're the Stalinist faction. The other guys, they're not, but we're the Stalinists." And Stalin said, "Cut that out." Right? But why were they both claiming to be the Stalinist faction? Right? They were both trying to claim we're the ones that Moscow really likes. Right? As that the Communist Party of the United States was very much a party, that was very much inspired by the Soviet Union and looked up to the Soviet Union with great admiration. And there was competition among the leaders of the Communist Party to get the endorsement of the Soviet Union. That things like this went on. And there was, all the amazing work that the Communist Party did. I mean, they were such an amazing organization during this time period. But yes, in a lot of ways, many people who were in it during that time, if you read memoirs and autobiographies, they describe a kind of atmosphere where it wasn't okay to disagree. Where things were done in a very kind of, top-down way. If you asked a question, you said, "Hey, why is the party doing this?" They would look at you and say, "Did you not read the editorial in the Daily Worker?" And that there was kind of an attitude that, we're here to follow orders. The people at the top, they know what they're doing, be a good comrade. And that's a problem, right? And that's a problem. And that may have been why they had some problems later on. But that doesn't discount all the amazing work that they did, right? And that doesn't mean that they didn't do amazing, heroic things. And they really were the vanguard. I mean, in the 1930s, they did, in terms of fighting for the working class, in terms of popularizing socialism, in terms of fighting fascism, the Communist Party did amazing work. But yes, was there kind of an authoritarian atmosphere internally? Probably. And that's not something we should ignore, and we should admit that, right? And as we go on to build more working class and revolutionary organizations, we should fight against that tendency, right? And that's a question, is how do you build an organization that is effective and disciplined, but also not stifling and authoritarian, right? How do you build a structure within a revolutionary organization where it can be as effective as possible, but also as open as possible, right? How do you do that, right? There's questions about how do you do that. And democratic centralism is kind of central to that discussion. And I've talked about that elsewhere. So, but Whitaker Chambers, I guess that was the beginning of this question. Whitaker Chambers is full of it. I'm sorry. I don't believe half the stuff in his memoir. The fact that he became a stool pigeon and I do think it's funny that he hated Ayn Rand. That I think is hilarious. Whitaker Chambers was this raving right-wing anti-communist, but he read Atlas Shrugged. And he wrote a review of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. And he said that behind every line in Atlas Shrugged, there's a voice saying, "To the gas chamber go." He basically called Ayn Rand a Nazi. And he could tell that there was something demented. As conservative and right-wing and anti-communist as Whitaker Chambers was, he read Atlas Shrugged and he said, "This is some evil shit. This is some really, really evil shit." So that's kind of amazing, I think. That even Whitaker Chambers read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and said, "This is evil stuff." So there you go. All righty. What about Gaddafi? Well, I wrote an introduction to Gaddafi's Green Book. Gaddafi had many great achievements for the people of Libya. They had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. They had, universal healthcare was provided to the whole population. Education was provided to the whole population. They built the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River. Great achievements. People were trying to get into Libya under Gaddafi's leadership. People from all across the continent were trying to get in. But under the overthrow of how that NATO has brought Libya into the free market system, now people are trying to flee and get out. The economic achievements of Gaddafi in Libya are not small. Not small at all. I mean, really, really big improvements in people's lives, huge rise in GDP. That's why it's infuriating. When Gaddafi died, they would say things like, oh, he impoverished his people. No, he did not impoverish his people. Libyans lived way better than anybody else on the African continent. It's just infuriating when they lie like that. This is the sad thing, is I'm being very careful how I use my words here, right? Because the way that people argue against stuff like this, a lot of cases, like, Jabba the Vosh is the king of this, is they don't actually argue against anything you said. They just argue ad ridicule, right? They just ridicule you, right? And so it's like, I mean, it's like, the idea is that I'm supposed to say on here, like, Gaddafi was a great leader. Then they've got the quote, Caleb said Gaddafi was a great leader. That's crazy. I mean, it's like, that's how these people argue, right? They don't, it's argumentium ad ridicule, right? Here's a quote from somebody, and that's crazy. That's nuts. And it's like, they don't explain the context. They don't explain why this person believes this. They just, oh, you said that. That's insane. And a lot of times it's a factually true statement. That's what's so infuriating about it, right? I mean, someone will say, the Soviet Union did a lot to raise living standards. Oh my God, did you just say that? Yes, and it's factually true. Yeah, but you just said the Soviet Union, and it's true. Yeah, but you said that the Soviet Union raised living standards. Yes, I did. What's the point? But it's just, this is how liberals argue, right? They appeal to everyone knows, right? Everyone knows the Soviet Union's bad. So if you say the Soviet Union raised living standards dramatically for the population, they go, but everybody knows the Soviet Union's bad. You said that. And it's like, I'm presenting actual data to back up what I'm saying. And they go, oh, but you said. And it's like, again, we're not talking about what's true and what's not. We're talking about what everyone knows. It's a classic tactic, argumentium ad ridicule. And it's what these liberals do. It's what liberals primarily do in our time. It's a big part of cancel culture. It's part of cancel culture, right? It's you don't argue against what people say. You find something that someone says, and as a result of what they have said, you pin a label on them, right? So if you say the Soviet Union raised living standards very dramatically, they say, well, that is supporting Stalin. So you're now a Stalin apologist, and Stalin apologists are bad, right? You just said a true thing. You made a statement that was factually accurate, but then they put a label on you, right, with that statement, and then they can cancel you on that basis. And then whenever you say anything, oh, you're a Stalin, don't listen to him, he's a Stalin apologist, right? Don't listen to him, he's a genocide denier, right? I mean, and it's like, they don't engage with what you actually said, right? Have you seen the Russian film Burnt by the Sun? And if so, is the message of the film suggesting anything about Stalin and Russia? I have not seen the film Burnt by the Sun, so I cannot answer that question, but thank you for asking. All right, the scariest moments in my activism. Well, I don't really, there's some things I can't talk about, right? I mean, and it's, again, that's a little bit of a provocative question, right? That's, because it's like, like I don't want to go over everything that ever happened, right? Because I don't want to say anything that could be used against somebody or something like that. But in terms of things I'll talk about, I remember the first time I got close to being arrested. The first time I was close to being arrested, and this is actually not the scariest moment at all. This is just an anecdote. The first time I was close to being arrested, I was not 18 years old. I was a freshman in college, and in Cleveland, there had been a young man killed by the police. Had been shot by the police in a neighborhood. So the communist group I was working with, they called me up, and they said to me, "Hey, we're going to go out to the neighborhood where this police shooting happened. And we're going to, there's a vigil called tonight." So we're going to go to the vigil. I said, okay, all right. So I got on the subway train, met somebody somewhere. They picked me up in their car, and we drove to the neighborhood where this young man had been killed by the police. So we're in the neighborhood, and the vigil hadn't started yet, but it was dark. It was very dark. and there were a lot of police in the neighborhood. Um, so we're in the neighborhood, and we go to where the vigil is going to be, and we're early, I guess, because no one's there. So there's a bunch of police in the neighborhood, and this older guy I'm with, boomer, older activist, is wearing a T-shirt that says "Danger, Police in Area." Right? It's like an anti-police brutality shirt. Danger, police in area. So we're in this neighborhood, and we're standing there at the place this vigil is going to happen. It's dark. We're standing there. We're white. This is a black neighborhood, and the police are all there, and they're walking up and down the streets, and most of them are white. There's a woman police officer who's white. She sees us. So she comes over to us, and she says, she says, she says to the older guy, she said, "Where did you get that T-shirt?" And he says, I don't have to answer that. And she says, you're in this neighborhood right now with what just happened here, and you're not going to tell me where you got that T-shirt? He said, yeah. He said, I'm not going to tell you where I got that T-shirt. I don't have to do that. And she said, well, you know what? She said, I'm going to arrest you for loitering. And he said, well, you just do that. You take me in for loitering. I don't care. And so she goes away. And so I said to the guy, I said, maybe we should leave now because they're probably going to come back and arrest you for loitering. He said, no. He said, let him do anything. And I'm 18, and I've never been arrested before at that point. And I'm like, why are we staying here? The woman just basically said she's going to come back and arrest you for wearing this T-shirt, right? She's going to arrest you for loitering or whatever, right? She's going to put the cuffs on you, basically. He's like, no, I'm not going anyplace. And I just didn't understand that. I was thinking like, oh my God, what if they arrest me too, right? I mean, we're like partners here. And so we're standing there, right? But then out of the blue, all the people for the community vigil showed up. So, the vigil happened. And when the vigil was happening, like the police kind of backed away and let this vigil happen. So then it was kind of over. That was the first time I was like thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to be arrested. It's not the scariest thing that happened by far, but it's an anecdote that comes to mind. The T-shirt said, danger, police in area, like an anti-police brutality shirt that offended this white woman cop. She was just deeply offended by it. What I thought was kind of amusing was that when the vigil happened, I'll never forget this. So they had the vigil, right? And all these people showed up with signs like "Stop Police Brutality," stuff like that. But the vigil had been called by a local minister, and the minister who brought all of his like church to this community where this young man had been murdered by the police or killed by the police, murdered, right? The minister, brought his church there, and there were a lot of people there to protest police brutality. But there was also a bunch of people that were there to just like have a vigil, and the minister started speaking and praying, and you would not know from his speaking and praying that the police were the ones that killed this young man. It was all about how we need less violence in the neighborhood and peace in the hood, and it was all about and then he started talking about how young people are bad, and he started talking about how the young people in the neighborhood do drugs and are in gangs, and some of the young people, he said, are homosexuals, and some of the young, he gave this really, really, like, he was blaming the young people in the neighborhood for the police killing this young guy. It was very sad. So I'm standing there, and then there were some people that were like, police brutality protesters who were heckling a little bit. That was kind of a strange moment. Yeah, I don't know why I'm even talking about that, because I did stuff like that. It's kind of a weird moment. But I don't know. I mean, look, I was part of Occupy Wall Street. There were many times during the Occupy Wall Street protests where things got rough, things got rowdy. I saw a woman get thrown down the stairs one time at Grand Central Station. I mean, there's video of that on YouTube, and that was horrendous, Police picked up this woman and threw her down those marble stairs. And then, after she was thrown down the marble stairs, she was covered in blood, and they're arresting her. That was pretty awful. I don't know. I mean, and again, I don't want to talk about everything on here because I'm just reflecting. I don't know. Like what are we talking about? The question was scariest moments in activism. Well, look, when I went on a ship to Yemen, with the Red Crescent Society, that was a scary moment in activism, right? It was 13 days. I was on a ship with medical aid trying to get to a war-torn country, and the ship created an international incident. I don't know. Here's one. Collinwood High School, right? And you can read about this. It's in Cleveland Scene magazine, did a whole story about this. Collinwood High School in Cleveland, little tiny high school in Cleveland. It's an inner city high school in Cleveland. Um, they had a walkout at their high school against teacher layoffs. The students walked out of the high school in protest of it. So I heard about the walkout. Like I saw the Facebook event basically, and so me and my roommate, who were communist activists in Cleveland, we went to the walkout because hey, it says on Facebook a bunch of kids are going to walk out of school. So we showed up, and we showed up at the walkout. Well, only 6 kids got out of the school because the police at the school chained the doors of the school shut. They chained the doors of the school shut to keep the kids in school, which is totally illegal, fire code violation. Anyhow, so only like 5 or 6 kids that actually got out of the building. So then, there's 5 or 6 kids out of the building. We're talking to them. We're like, oh, okay, you're having a walkout. Okay. And we're just trying to be activists. Like, oh, these kids are having a walkout, so why not support them? The police car pulls up, and the police violently arrested 2 young women, violently arrested them. And I filmed it. I had a camera on me, and I filmed the whole thing. Um, so I'm filming the police, arresting this woman violently, and then I turned to my roommate after I filmed, and you can see it still on YouTube, like the police violently arresting this young woman. You can see it, and you know, then then I turned to my roommate. I'm like, let's get the hell out of here because we have the video of police doing some not so good stuff. So as we're leaving, I remember one of the cops, grabbed me by the shoulder and was like, "You want to effing talk to me? You want to effing talk to me?" And I'm just like, "What?" He grabs me by the shoulder, and he's like, he's like, "You keep your protesting shit downtown. You understand me? You keep your protesting shit downtown. We can tear you apart." I mean, just making like really vile threats. And I thought, oh my God, like he's gonna like take our camera and like smash the camera and arrest us, right? But he didn't take the camera. And so we got out of there and immediately uploaded the footage to YouTube. And that was a big thing. So the video of it was all over the local news in Cleveland, of the police arresting these 2 young women. The video of it, was all over the local news. So then I remember, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember which channel it was in Cleveland, did a hit piece about me. This was back when I had long hair and a beard, claiming that I had organized the protests, which I didn't. I just heard about them on Facebook, and thank goodness I showed up. And they did this hit piece about me, and they it was like that local communist organizes protests, and they like showed me like in slow motion walking like on the film, and I was like, whoa, and it's like, local agitator stirs up students to get into violence, and it was like, it was crazy, right? So then, it was really wild. So then the local like alternative paper, which is called Cleveland Scene, interviewed the mother of the 2 students who were beaten up, and she said Caleb didn't have anything to do with the protest. This is the first time I ever met him. He just showed up, and so she defended me. And so then the local newspaper interviewed me about being a communist. And so they did this whole story about me called, and you can read it, it's still on the internet from 2010. It's called The Communists Next Door in Cleveland. And it's all about me and my roommate at the time. And, we're both, local communists, and, and it told our side of the story. And it like was a rebuttal to the local news hit piece about me being the evil local communist. So yeah, that was pretty neat. That was in Cleveland. That was neat. Now there were times when I was in Detroit, where they were going to evict somebody, and we were sitting on the porch, and the cops were threatening to arrest us because we wouldn't get up when they were going to evict a family from their house when we were fighting home foreclosures. That happened. I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've told little anecdotes here and there. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's that. I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, is there more to it than that? I mean, I don't know. I mean, those scary moments I just told you about, cop cussing us out, and yeah, I mean, things happen, right? The class struggle. I mean, this is how things go. Not everything I did back in the day was necessarily the right thing to do. I look back on some of the ways I interacted with people. Sometimes I was a little bit shrill. I was a little bit over the top. And that's kind of the danger. I feel like sometimes people that are in the streets, you only have your own eyes. Um, you only have your own eyes, right? So you only see things from your perspective. But when I was not doing like street activism, um, anymore, when I was like more doing journalism and like what I do now, I started to realize that I saw protests from a different light. Protests looked different to me. And I realized that in a lot of cases, the way protesters appeared was not strategic. But that was something I never would have thought of when I was in the middle of it, right? So, I don't know. I mean, it gave me kind of a new perspective to suddenly be a media person covering protests and not actually be a protester. It made me realize that sometimes the way the protesters operate is not strategic. It's a little bit, it's a little bit off-putting to a lot of people, and to the media that's covering it. Like one thing, for example, like if I'm covering a protest, right? If I'm covering a protest as a journalist, and I ask someone a question, in order to get them talking, I'm going to ask confrontational questions. I'm going to say, now some people say, right, say it's a protest against war, right? Protest against bombing Syria. I might ask you as a journalist, some people say the U.S. needs to bomb Iraq to stop terrorism. What do you say to that? Right? Now, I don't agree with the USA bombing Iraq, but it's my job to get you to answer that, right? I'm trying to get a quote that I can use. So I say to you, hey, some people say the USA has to bomb Iraq to stop terrorism. I cannot tell you how many times I have asked a question like that to somebody, and I try to say it as gently as I can. Sometimes I'll say, now, somebody else who might not agree, I try to be, and I'll say, hey, some people say the USA needs to stop terrorism, so we have to bomb Iraq. I don't know how many times I've asked that question, pointed the microphone at somebody, and had them go, "What do you mean? What do you fucking mean? You fucking asshole! I'm just like, whoa! I'm asking you. This is my job, you know. So many times I will ask like a question like, well, now some people say, and the protester will like, you fucking, and it's like, Jesus, like I'm trying to get you to answer. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not Jesus. Like when a reporter asks you a question, they're asking you a question because they want you to answer and give them something they can quote. They want a soundbite they can use for the news. They want a quote that they can use, right? And like, my goodness, right? I'm not fighting with you. I'm not trying to make you look stupid. I'm trying to get you to say something that I can use for my news story. Like, calm down, people, right? And I've been so many heated situations. You go to an Antifa kind of thing, right? Say to Antifa, some people say that these Nazis just have free speech. Yeah, well, that's effing bullshit, you asshole reporter. You come here. I'm just like, I'm just asking you a question. This is my job. Chill. Chill. My God. I don't feel like I did that when I was a protester. I feel like when I was asked questions, I may not have appreciated the questions I was asked sometimes. I didn't like blow up at the reporter. Like, there's just this like very, very heated exchanges. Well, I don't know what it is, but like at protests, you will get people who just, it's like they're ready to blow, right? And it's just like you would think that if you're out protesting about something, you're willing to talk to people about it, right? Right? I mean, but I guess when people are protesting, it's often because they feel very passionate about the issue they're protesting around. So if they hear you questioning them, they take it kind of personally. I also think that sometimes there are people who go to protests and they're new to it, right? And they don't have a lot of confidence, right? They're protesting around this issue, but they're a little bit nervous and they're a little bit afraid of how they look. So if you ask them a tough question, they might feel like you're attacking them personally or something. And that's been moments where I've been at protests and I'm like, okay, like, as and again, I'm on the other side here. I'm not the media I'm not a protester now. I'm media covering protests. And, or another thing that happens is balance, right? You have to interview both sides, right? If there's a pro-war rally, there's an anti-war rally, you got to talk to both sides. And I'll get people, I go to the pro-war side, ask them questions. Go to the anti-war side, ask them questions. When I go to the anti-war side, why were you talking to them over there? Because I'm a reporter and this is my job. No, why would you give them any coverage? They're wrong. It's like, because I'm trying to have balanced coverage, because this is my job, my friend. I don't know. I shouldn't talk about this too much, but it's just, it's like, protesters can be very, very emotional, and it can get scary, honestly, when you're dealing with protesters, because, there's potential for violence in these situations, right? These are kind of scary circumstances. And, I'm just there trying to report on these events, and I'm asking you a question and you're threatening to punch me. I was in Oakland one time. I'll never forget this. I was in Oakland after the Trump election, after Trump got elected, and I was interviewing people on the streets of Oakland, that were out protesting against Trump. They were having like nightly rallies against Trump, and I was just interviewing people. And there was a group of anarchists who decided I was right-wing news and started they decided I wasn't allowed to interview anybody. And so they started jumping in front of the camera and threatening to beat me up and all this. And I'm like, I'm not right-wing news. So I pulled out my business card, gave them my business card, and I said, Google me. And they Googled me, and they found out I was Occupy Wall Street, I was in a certain Marxist group, and they're like, oh, and they apologized. They were very apologetic, and they took down their tweets, but they had taken my picture and announced I was with a right-wing news site and all that. I was not. I was very gently just doing my job, and it's very scary. It can be very scary when people are just loaded with, loaded with, it's like they see everyone as an enemy. Right? They see everyone as an enemy. That's not a good thing to do. So there you go. There you go. But anyway, yeah, and again, it's an odd question that you ask, scariest moments in activism, and I mean, I didn't exactly give you an answer to that. I just kind of reflected for a moment. I talked about what happened in Cleveland at Collinwood High School. I talked about a lot of different things. So, I mean, my activism is pretty well out there. You can look me up, right? I've done a lot of things. It's so funny. I've had people in the last few, I had people in the last few, what is it? The last few, what is it? The last few weeks, I've had people tell me that I never have done anything. I've never done any real organizing, or, it's like, no, folks, I've done quite a bit of real organizing, what has he ever done? I've done quite a bit. Favorite Foster bio. I've done quite a bit of real organizing. I've spent a long time, I spent a month in North Carolina building the March on Wall Street South, the protest against the Democratic Convention in 2012. That was not a pleasant experience, I'll tell you that much. I lived in this tiny little hotel in North Carolina, and I was surrounded by SJWs who are pretending to be communists and are not, and did not like me, and that was a miserable experience, right? If there's, I don't know, some of the best communists I know are in North Carolina these days, but the ones that I was in, where was I? What city was I in? I don't even remember. 2012, I was in North Carolina, and I spent a month in North Carolina organizing the March on Wall Street South and the protests, and I was in this building where every George Soros NGO is, and I was not happy. I'll tell you that much. I was surrounded by people that were very, very unpleasant, and all of them are from North Carolina. They talk about Charlotte, North Carolina, is the Wall Street of the South. Right? And, these are people from Ivy League schools, they're not Ivy League schools, but they're from good schools, UNC Chapel Hill, UNC Greensboro, good schools, wealthier families. And, I was very interested in Marxism, and they would talk to me like I was an idiot. They would, hello there. Now, we understand that, it was just the most condescending, anti-working class, and, I really don't I'll tell you that much. I really do not like the NGO culture. All right, I really don't like it. If you hear me clap once, if you hear me clap twice, now let's all go around in a circle and talk about our favorite hot dog or our favorite pizza, and we're gonna do like getting to know you activities, and then we're all gonna talk about how I just the NGO organizing where it's like everything turns into like group therapy. It's like kindergarten politics. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Right? And it's so miserable. I really don't like NGO organizing. I really don't. And I spent a month in North Carolina trying to build these protests surrounded by NGO socialists who have never read Marx and thought I must be crazy because I had. And like you talk to these people, and I mean, oh my God, it was not fun. Not fun. Not pleasant. But there you go. I mean, that same year, earlier in the year, I spent like 2 weeks in Chicago building for the NATO summit, when the protests against the NATO summit, and postering up all over the city and helping out with that. And yeah, I've been a lot of places, folks, and I've done a lot of stuff. But that doesn't make me any better than anybody else. I'm just telling you, communism is what I'm about. And I've spent a long time trying to put my ideas into practice and meeting with people and organizing. And I've had some good experiences, and I've had some very negative experiences also. And I've learned from those experiences, and I've built upon my knowledge, right? So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. All right. Okay. Technology causing unemployment, of course, right? That's the contradiction of capitalism, right? As technology increases, the need for workers also decreases, right? Under capitalism, you only work so long as your work enriches capital. You sell your labor power in order to survive, and that's capitalism. And the capitalist is constantly looking to hire as few workers as possible and pay the workers he does hire as little as possible to maximize his profits. So capitalism is a system where abundance creates poverty. Many times I've talked about the coal miner's riddle. Right? There's a little boy, he's cold. He says, "Father, why is it so cold?" He says, "Because we can't afford any coal to heat our home with." He says, "Father, why can we not afford any coal to heat our home with?" He says, "Because of the fact that I lost my job in the coal mine, so we don't have any money." And he says, "Why did you lose your job in the coal mine, Father?" He says, "Because there's too much coal." That's capitalism. It's not rational. Someone says that the Irish Republican Socialist Party is the fastest growing party in Ireland. Okay, great. I mean, I don't know much about the Irish Republican Socialist Party. Don't know much about it. So, I know I don't know much about the different groups in Ireland. I know Sinn Féin is the main Irish nationalist and technically a democratic socialist party, and it's pro-Palestine and such. But other than that, there are many different Irish Marxist-Leninist groups. There are many different groups that are anti-imperialist and anti-British. So and there's still there's still armed stuff that goes on, right? I mean, I think there's still what is it, real IRA, continuity IRA, that do kind of ultra left adventurist attacks and assassinations. And there's still and there are some like weird ultra leftist groups that all right. Ugh, synthetic left book. Yeah, there's some weird ultra leftist groups out there. So there you go. Alrighty. Okay. Liu Shaoqi. Liu Shaoqi was a figure in the Chinese Communist Party. He wrote a book called How to Be a Good Communist, which was widely studied in the Chinese Communist Party. And he was considered to take the pro-Soviet position. He was the opposition to Mao. He didn't like Mao. And he was taking the pro-Soviet position, and he thought, after the Sino-Soviet split and after the what is it called, the Great Leap Forward and the economic problems, he was the opposition figure in the Chinese Communist Party against Mao, and he was the one who the Cultural Revolution was largely launched against. The Cultural Revolution in China was a response to Liu Shaoqi. Yeah, that's who Liu Shaoqi was. He was the revisionist, right? He was the target of the Cultural Revolution, and I believe he's been revived. I think the after his death, Deng Xiaoping and others have said he was good. They've what do they call that when you're like you're revived or you're restored, or it's like after you die they decide you're rehabilitated. I think he's been rehabilitated by Deng Xiaoping. Alrighty. The Trump Blackwater pardon. Yeah, it makes me absolutely sick also, right? I mean, these people committed murder, right? If you shoot into a crowd of people, that's called murder. That is called murder. And Trump pardoned these people. Not the first time he's done something like this. Basically sending a message to the Pentagon, hey, it's okay to kill innocent Iraqi civilians. These guys weren't even military. They're Blackwater military contractors, and Trump pardoned them. Unbelievable. Trump should pardon Edward Snowden. Trump should pardon Julian Assange. This is completely unbelievable. And what they did to Chelsea Manning, torturing her and trying to get her to testify. The Great Reset. The Great Reset, it was, it's a real document. It's been widely discussed. And now in the pandemic, people are arguing that it's being put into practice. But it was basically an economic restructuring vision that some of the big banks and World Business Forum and some of the major players have talked about, and some conspiracy kind of people think that they are using the pandemic to implement it. The pandemic's all a big conspiracy to implement it. Well, it's a real document that was widely discussed. And look, I mean, neoliberalism never lets a good crisis go to waste. So you can bet they're doing everything they can to manipulate this crisis for their own ends, right? And to, Jeff Bezos and big corporations, they've made out like bandits. The Financial Times, their weekend edition, talked about the big corporations that made the most money in 2020, right? Read over who they are, right? I mean, there have been certain ultra-rich entities, mainly Silicon Valley entities, that have done pretty well as a result of this pandemic. And that's not good. That's not good. All righty. How do you attend the World Festival of Youth and Students? You apply on the website. That's how you attend. On the website, the last time, that's what I did. I applied to go as a delegate on the website. That's how you go. And then after that, you book a flight. And the one in Ecuador was the same thing. I applied on the website, and then I booked a flight. Yeah, pretty simple. You apply to go on the website, you fill out the form, and then you book a flight. That's what you do. And I think you have to be approved when you apply. I think they have to but you'll probably be approved and you just go. Alrighty. They may not approve you, but you apply and then you go, or you don't get approved. I don't know. I don't know. I was approved both times, so there you go. Alrighty. I think it's good if you're connected to an organization. I think you're more likely to be approved. But you list your organizational affiliation. The left KMT, right? Well, so there's the KMT, right, which is the Chinese Nationalist Party. And when Mao established the People's Republic of China, there was a breakaway from the KMT that supported Mao. They're called the left KMT. They still exist. They have like 1 or 2 seats in the Chinese parliament. And they say things like, we take leadership from the Chinese Communist Party. People argue that they're almost symbolic. They're a party other than the Communist Party and the Chinese government. Alrighty. Moving right along with the super chats. All right. I did not watch the Vosh and Hakim stream. I started to, and I thought, why am I doing this? Like, I don't want to hear that, and then I don't. I mean, I really don't. Like, I just, I saw that he was very, he tweeted something like, oh, I'm so polite or something, glad we had a polite stream. Well, there you go. I mean, whatever. I don't find Vosh to be whatever. I mean, the way he has engaged with me in such a dishonest manner, he tweets out that I support Jeff Bezos, stuff like that. I mean, Bosch is a liar. He accused me of believing in social Darwinism, which I clearly don't believe in. He is a dishonest person, and he is motivated by pro-imperialist sentiments. Like, he supports U.S. imperialism. That's all there is to it, so whatever. All right. Syria regime change sparked World War III. There have been a number of close calls in Syria, where Russian plane is shot down, or the Syrian military is attacked by the U.S. and they say, oh, it was an accident. And yeah, yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of close calls that could have led to World War III in Syria. Absolutely. Absolutely. No doubt about it. All righty. Um, Uyghur stuff. I've made whole videos talking about the Uyghur stuff. Look, we don't know what's happening. There's a lot of things that are published in U.S. media as if they are absolute fact, and you look at the source, it's not a credible source. There's been reports on CNN about somebody, and it's completely debunked, and they look into what actually happened to the person, and it's not true. So does that mean that nothing bad is happening? No, right? It's very possible that bad things are happening, but we've caught them lying about the Uyghurs over and over and over again. So that means that whatever is true is mixed in with a bunch of lies. So, take it with a grain of salt. And this precedent that they've set, where if the US government accuses some country of something, we're not allowed to question it. That's what these people think, that if you question any allegation made by the US government against any country, you're the same as a Nazi Holocaust denier. That's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. Okay? So, there you go. Socialism and oligarchy. Of course, right? The idea of socialism is to empower the population, get rid of a situation where a small elite controls society. Popular power, popular mobilization. That's the opposite of oligarchy, where a small elite rules. So, yeah, I guess it's about getting rid of oligarchy. All right. China's dual currency plan and its 5-year plans. I don't really know enough about that. I can't really comment on it. Sorry. Best William Z. Foster biography. Best William Z. Foster biography by far is William Z. Foster. What is it called? It's called Forging American Communism: The Life of William Z. Foster. That is the most detailed biography of William Z. Foster. Tragedy of American Radicalism really just relies on William Z. Foster's printed works. It's not very good, honestly. It's using William Z. Foster to make kind of a Shachtmanite anti-communist political point. And that's called The Tragedy of American Radicalism. I didn't like it. There's another book called Working Class Giant, which is mainly little anecdotes about William Z. Foster from the CPUSA, but it's not very detailed, and it's almost kind of cartoonish a little bit. It's a little bit it's a lot of little personal anecdotes that make William Z. Foster sound really good, but they're it's a little sappy, right? But yeah, William Z. Foster, Forging American Communism: The Life of William Z. Foster is the most detailed book on the life of William Z. Foster, and I learned so much from it. And it's really goes into great detail about William Z. Foster's entire life, all kinds of archives, his family, his archive. I mean, whoever wrote that book really did a lot of work to teach us about William Z. Foster. Right, that's why I asked if you saw the reports. The Uyghur camps are now admittedly operation by the sea. I haven't seen stuff like that. Sorry. I haven't seen that. All right. All right. Jack Ma disappearing. I don't know what's going on. I mean, don't ask me what's going on. We'll know soon enough. If there's an issue with Jack Ma, we'll find out what's going on. Yeah. Synthetic Left book update. Well, look, Trump killed 300 Russians in Syria in February 2018. Okay. That's what someone super chatted. Okay. The Synthetic Left book. As far as the Synthetic Left book, yeah. 1. I see everyone tweeting 1. What the heck was that super chat? Yeah, this is strange stuff. This is very strange stuff. I see everyone tweeting the number 1. What in the world is going on? What's going on? Okay. Alrighty. The Synthetic Left book, I wrote a draft of it. And I read it, and I realized that I needed to go into much greater detail, because of the fact that so many people don't know about a lot of the topics. So the current draft is written, and I'm completing there's a really long bibliography, and I've been rewriting sections of it, but it needs some work. It really needs some work. I feel like I want to put out another short book about Silicon Valley fascism first, but I haven't written that one yet, and I already have a draft of the Synthetic Left book. So I'm working on different things, basically. You know, yeah, that's kind of where things are at. You know, I just, you know, you want things to be good, right? I mean, you want to put out high quality work. I did a huge amount of work on the Synthetic Left book over the summer, a huge amount of research, and I put together a basic manuscript. But you know, but we shall see. I think I still need to expand it out because so much of the history that I'm talking about people don't know about. And so I need to put everything I write about in proper context. So that means that I need to, I don't know, and I don't want to leave anything out because I'm only going to get to write that book once. You know, that's the thing is, I mean, after I write that book, I can't write it again, right? So I want to make sure it has everything in it because it's a really important topic, CIA manipulation of left-wing politics, etc. I need to go into great detail about what I'm talking about. You know, I need to have meticulous amounts of information in there. I don't want to miss anything. I don't want to write it and go, oh shit, I could have talked about this. And it's a big topic. But yeah, I mean, there's a draft of it that's done, and I need to revisit it and continue fixing it up and getting it to where I'm ready to publish it. So there you go. All right, folks. I think that's all for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Always fun. Oh, is Saunders' Cultural Cold War in the Synthetic Left book? I mean, I talk about the Cultural Cold War quite a bit, and I quote a number of different books and documents. So, yeah, there you go. But yeah, alrighty, all right, folks. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. The people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. It's a pleasure to work with all of you. Pleasure to engage with you. Hopefully I'll do another live very soon. Hopefully tomorrow. We'll see. My best wishes to all of you. Have a good night.